Okay, so welcome everybody to this panel on gender equality, religious denial, and religious support. The participants are in this panel, Bani Dugal, who's the principal representative of the Baha'i international community to the United Nations, Pastor Lidia Maggi, who is a Baptist Evangelical Christian Union of Italy minister, Francesco Biaggi, a professor of comparative constitutional law here at the University of Bologna, Liya Makhmutova, who is the president of the Baltic Muslim Women's Union, Nayla Tabbara, president of the Adyan Foundation, Yujie Wang, who is the vice director of the School of Philosophy of the Renmin University, G20, president of Partnership for Faith and Development, and last but not least, Wolfgang Dan Speckgruber, who is the founding director of the Liechtenstein Institute on Self-Determination at Princeton University. So as you see, this is a panel that really resonates very much to the spirit of the G20 Interfaith, because it really puts together people from very different backgrounds. People who all share a commitment to advancing gender equality while preserving a culturally and religiously diverse world. Obviously, I think we all agree that religious systems are all gendered. Religions very strongly impact the gender relations. They contribute to shaping gender roles. But many religions are rooted in patriarchy. But having said this, as systems of beliefs, religions are not the sole, and they're not necessarily even the primary determinant of women's subjugation. Because religions are interpreted by humans, it is obvious that religions have the potential to be egalitarian as well as to be patriarchal. And in this respect, it is crucial, and this is one of the super interesting elements of this panel, it is crucial to disentangle the cultural, political, and the theological, ethical dimensions of religion. Religions can be empowering for women. We will listen to many speakers who are going to advance these arguments. To women who choose to listen to the egalitarian ethical force of religion, even in contexts that prioritize androcentric patriarchal interpretations and applications of religious law. We should also bear in mind something that sometimes we don't really think about it, namely that women constitute the majority worldwide of active members of religious institutions. This, of course, allows women to occupy legitimately a place in the public sphere that otherwise might actually be blocked to them. And in certain circumstances, women are able to subvert the place they occupy thanks to religion for their purposes. We have been witnessing women mobilizing against women from within religion, mobilizing against traditional androcentrism. For example, in 2019, at the Synod of Bishops for the Amazon, a Brazilian nun openly articulated, I think in a brilliant way, the disconnect between women's factual and official role in the Catholic Church. She said, most catechists in Brazil are women. We women, we lead the congregations. We animate all the liturgical aspects of the Mass. We are important, but we are not visible because we are not officially recognized. Moreover, women increasingly engage in theological interpretation. This is something that we will listen from Professor Tabbara. So they challenge this way the monopoly of androcentric exegesis, and they are able to dismantle, or as some women theologians put it, to unread patriarchal interpretations of religion that frequently are presented as the word of God and thus as indisputable. Women theologians really play an invaluable role in terms of promoting gender equality. I really want to stress this. I'm so happy to have Professor Tabbara here for this purpose. Because in effect, their work is really able to promote gender equality from within the religion by chartering the manner in which authority has been constructed throughout the tradition and the manner in which diverse context shapes ideas of authority and leadership. So I don't want to take any further time from our participants. All of the participants in this panel bring an invaluable contribution to this debate. So I will now give the floor to our first participant. As I asked all of you before, let's try to keep each intervention within 10 minutes, because my hope is that we can have a very fruitful conversation, even if we don't have that much time. So please, Bani, no, please, as you feel more comfortable. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susanna. As Susanna has said, organized religion, whose very reason for being entails service to the cause of solidarity and peace, has often stood as one of their most formidable obstacles. Religious rationale has been used to justify the persecution of those who are seen as the other or less than. And it continues to be invoked in defense of customs that perpetuate violence and oppression of women. Such reflections, however painful, are less an indictment of religion than a reminder of the unique power that it possesses. They do, however, offer a glimpse of the great weight of responsibility that religious leaders bear toward their followers and to the people of the world. To take just one example, religious leadership has a particular responsibility to promote the advancement of women. The history of patriarchy and paternalism practiced in the name of religion is well documented, and I'm not going to go into it in depth, but women have been systematically excluded from decision-making. Their potential contributions have been dismissed, and the possibilities for them to apply religious teachings to the life of society to effect positive transformation have been severely curtailed. But at each stage of humanity's development, and certainly in the midst of the present emerging global community, religion has acquired new meanings, functions, and expressions. Today, as the critical role of women is increasingly recognized, their voices must inform exploration of the nature of religion and its role in contemporary life. For religion has also demonstrated remarkable power to release the capacity of women to promote a more just organization of human society and more equitable relationships among women and men. For Baha'is, religion can be understood as an indispensable means to awaken and cultivate at the practical and grassroots level the high-minded and noble attributes latent in every soul. It cannot be denied that those acting in the name of religion have often stood as obstacles, as has been mentioned. Yet, religious communities can, and indeed must, come to function as communities of practice, where spiritual principles, such as the equality of women and men, are applied thoughtfully to the life of society for the benefit of all. In this light, Baha'is around the world are working with like-minded collaborators to build new patterns of community life, as well as institutional structures that reflect the equality of women and men. Central to these efforts are moral and spiritual educational programs that seek to assist women and men, girls and boys of all backgrounds to develop the skills and attitudes necessary to contribute to the constructive transformation of their societies. In a world harassed by conflict in the name of religion, religious leaders have the responsibility for guiding their followers towards mutual understanding with those who think and believe differently. Legal mechanisms alone will not be sufficient to build a world in which no woman is prevented from making her full contribution by the shackles of religious prejudice. The role of religious leaders at as partners in word and deed in the creation of a culture of respect for human dignity and freedom of conscience or belief cannot be overstated. Women and men are inherently equal in capacity and nobility. This conviction is more widely accepted today, setbacks notwithstanding, than in any previous period of human history. Multitudes around the world have concluded that any social order worthy of our aspiration must be one in which women and men are afforded the same opportunities and respect. For Baha'is, the equality of women and men is not simply a sign of rising social consciousness. Rather, it is a divine reality ordained by the one creator. Women and men have been and will always be equal in the sight of God, wrote the prophet, founder of the Baha'i faith. Such words central to Baha'i identity and practice are first and foremost a call to action, for equality is not the lived reality for vast segments of humanity. In some parts of the world, women face discrimination that is overt and unabashed, enshrined into law and codified into policy. In other parts, greater willingness to pay lip service to the ideal of equality obscures the realities that are equally pernicious. A stubborn linking of female worth with sexuality and shallow definitions of physical beauty, for example, or the need to adopt distorted conceptions of male identity to be found acceptable for positions of leadership. On moral grounds, it's clear that the persistent denial of equality to half the world's population is an affront to human dignity. But there is also a growing recognition of the heavy societal cost and danger that a population invites by clinging to ways of oppression and marginalization. When a society refuses to fully draw on the strengths of all segments of its membership, frustration mounts, signs of unrest grow, and even if a semblance of order is maintained, the social order becomes increasingly fragile and precarious. It is no exaggeration to say that the stability of society rests in large part today on the principle of gender equality. This brings us to the question in our discussion today of how religious engagement can prepare women and girls for positions of leadership. In the process that I described within the Baha'i community with others within the community, numerous women are serving in roles such as facilitators of study groups or teachers of classes, and have become key contributors and recognized resources in their local community. As their experience expands, a percentage begins to coordinate the efforts of others at levels ranging from the neighborhood to the national level. For women in a range of circumstances, this experience has often fueled a growing sense of being a capable, empowered, and valued contributor to the common good. Seeing women taking on roles of increasing responsibility and visibility has also assisted men, and not infrequently challenged them to think inherited assumptions about gender roles. This is crucial, for in Baha'i thought, the advancement of women is a duty and an obligation, as well as a blessing and a benefit that pertains as much to men and boys as women and girls. Let it be known once more, the Baha'i writings state that until woman and man recognize and realize equality, social and political progress here or anywhere will not be possible. Thank you. I hope I kept him talking.
Thank you so much, Bani. This was really a wonderful way to begin our panel. Thank you also for teaching us about an unfortunately little known religious tradition that obviously has an enormous amount of theological materials to teach us. So thank you very much, very warmly. Now I give the floor to Pastor Lidia Maggi.
Thank you. Let me tell you a story from the Bible. A story that has to do with our team. A story that can be a mirror in which we can reflect our time. A story from a book that, even if it is for those who believe the word of God, bears all the signs of patriarchal culture where this rang out. Because God does not speak the language of angels. Where are we in this story? We are on the eve of entering in the promised land. Before taking possession of it, Israel discussed the modalities of division. After 40 years in the desert, finally the goal is approaching. We begin to glimpse the long-awaited reward. The land is a gift given to a liberated people, but it is necessarily from the outset to establish the way in which the gift can be used. It is at this point that the book of Numbers names the problem of inheritance. Since only male children can inherit, what happens if a man who has not had male children? A case that reflects the patriarchal culture of Israel and that will have nothing exceptional if to plead the cause for the inheritance were women, 5 young women, 5 sisters who find the courage to present themselves publicly before Moses, before the priest Eleazar, in front of the prince and all the assembly at the entry of the tent of the meeting. To present an argument in first person directly. They request, far from being shy and inexpert, these young women are determined to assert their rights, and they articulate their case with competence and speaking ability. And then they first illustrate the problem, and then they suggest the solution, the problem. We are preparing to distribute the land to each householder. But what will be for our father who died after 40 years in the desert and was not among those who rebelled? A righteous man who had not male children and therefore cannot receive his share of inheritance. Does this mean that the promise of the earth is not fulfilled for him? For those who died on their way through the desert, the promise is fulfilled in the next generation. But why should our father's name disappear in the middle of his family just because he didn't have any sons? And here is the solution proposed by the girls. Give us the portion owned by him. And Moses is forced to return to God's presence to consult on what to do. And God gives the girls right. It is true, I hadn't thought about it. If the girls don't get the land, we are equating the righteous men with the traitors who don't deserve the land. And here is the sentence. The daughters of Zelophehad say, well, you will give them as an inheritance a property among their father's brothers, and you will pass on to them the inheritance of their fathers. These women, these lawyers, set an important precedent that will lead the legislature to have to review the rule of inheritance. Even with a thousand of restriction, thanks to this sentence, a woman in a patriarchal society like that of ancient Israel can take possession of the land. She can have property. And you can still understand the strength of what was decided in the light of the appeal process. Yes, because the father's brothers challenged the sentence and appeal. In fact, the story does not end here. Conflicts on inheritance have always been the most difficult to solve. And so, at the very end of the book of Numbers, in the last chapter, we found the second part of the story, a second degree of judgment. The situation is less solemn. God does not speak directly. The girl's uncle presents their case without suggesting a solution. Indeed, these men are not even able to name the real problem that haunts them. They are scandalized because women have been granted the right to own the land. And where we will end up, at this rate, women will come to vote, to travel alone. But how to say it after God himself has ruled on this? Formally, the problem of the uncle raised is that the clan will lose the land when the girls get married. They will move into their husband's clan, and with them, the inheritance they owned. But Moses does not review his position on it. The girls do not lose the right to inherit, but a limit is placed. The 5 sisters will have to marry within the clan. These are the words of the new sentence. Girl can marry whoever they want, but they must choose the groom within the clan. For women who are not unfamiliar with free choice in affection, for women who are unfamiliar with free choice in affection, these words sound decidedly over the top. 5 enterprising women, 5, like the books of the Torah. Scripture remembers their names. It does not remember the names of their uncles, but repeats twice at the beginning and at the end of the story, the names of these young women. Makla, Noah, Ogla, Milcah, and Tirzah. And for the future generation, all women who seek the courage to oppose to patriarchal rules, we remember them. A story that says that it is possible to change. Do we think that our social, cultural, and religious rules are immutable? But if even the law of God, written directly with his fingers, that is coming from the heaven into Sinai, autographed by God himself, was changed only because 5 girls from the law dare to question, who are we? So as not to believe that it's possible to change situation that seems immutable. If even the Torah was discussed from below, why it is not possible to discuss our ecclesiastic rules, the way churches are organized, if there are people that are silenced? And this is not for revolutionary attitude, but in order to be faithful to the style of the law of God that does not fear to be questioned. The story closes at the adventure of a group of slaves searching for freedom. It is a part of the great story of Exodus. The founding event of Israel, the identity of God's people, is connected to this central story of Israel. So central that Jesus himself rewrite with his life, Exodus. So I wonder, if we find this story just before entering to the promised land, as a problem that needs to be solved before entering the land, I wonder, is it a possible sign that my freedom may not be a real freedom if around me there are people that do not have the same rights as I have? It is a possible sign that my justice is not a real justice if some people around me do not have their rights recognized. As you see, the question of gender is a concrete issue that involves everyone, even God, because a law of God that discriminates girls among boys, blacks among whites, Protestants among Catholics, Muslims among Christians, or on the other way around, deforms the face of God and makes my faith a cause of scandal for my sister and my brothers. Thank you for your attention.
So thank you so much, Pastor. I am so glad that you told this story, because I think there's two extremely important points that you raised. Well, the first, of course, is the idea that women within religion, since the dawn of times, have been able to challenge patriarchal rules, to challenge religious laws that determine how women can live, if they can own land, who they should marry, with whom they should have children. But also, thank you so much for having pointed to this crucial relationship between the subjection of women and the subjection of slaves and other forms of marginalization, to having pointed to this extremely important conceptual connection. So thanks a lot. This was a wonderful way to continue our conversation. I will now ask our two panelists, Francesco Biagi and Liya Makhmutova, to please come up here. And without any further ado, I will actually give the word to Francesco Biagi. And I am very happy to do so, because I know that Francesco is going to somehow continue the conversation by developing some of the arguments raised by our two previous speakers, but within the context of the contemporary Arab world.
In the first place, I would like to thank the organizers of this massive event. I really think they did a terrific job. I also like to thank Susanna Mancini for inviting me to this wonderful panel, rich of incredibly prestigious speakers. In my intervention today, I will say something regarding the extent to which women can be considered citizens in Arab countries after the so-called Arab Spring. And I will also briefly discuss some of the calls made in the past few years by prominent religious leaders and institutions towards a more equal citizenship, irrespective of one sex and religious denomination. My starting point is the following. We must acknowledge the fact that the constitutions that have been adopted after the so-called Arab Spring have significantly strengthened women's rights and gender equality. Just a couple of very brief examples. The 1986 Constitution of Morocco only granted political rights to women, whereas the 2011 Constitution, adopted after the Arab Spring, declares that the man and the woman enjoy in equality the rights and freedoms of civil, political, economic, social, cultural, and environmental character. Another example is the 2014 Tunisian Constitution, which is by far the most advanced Arab constitution when it comes to women's rights and gender equality. And moreover, we should also remember the fact that Tunisia was also the first Arab country to withdraw all its reservations to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the so-called CEDAW, and this happened in 2014. Unfortunately, there are still cases in which gender equality has not been recognized. The latest draft constitution of Libya from 2017, for example, stipulates that marriage is not founded on the equality between the spouses, but rather on the complementary roles between its members. And obviously the expression complementarity very much recalls the idea of women as exclusively as mothers and wives. So there are some negative examples, but as I said before, the good news is that in general terms, generally speaking, new Arab constitutions have reinforced women's rights and gender equality. And in my opinion, this formal improvement is an important step forward that should not by any means be underestimated. However, as could be easily predicted, in most of the cases, words were not followed by deeds, a fact that prevented women from substantially improving their condition. Actually, in some countries, their condition even worsened. Ordinary legislation, in particular, continues in a number of cases not to be in line with constitutional provisions proclaiming equality between men and women. And not surprisingly, the social, cultural, and religious context is the factor that more than others continues to determine the strongest resistance to the improvement of women's condition. In several cases, there is still a prejudice against women, a prejudice that is endemic throughout society. And this prejudice leads to everyday discriminations at work, in schools, in bureaucratic settings. And very often the problem is that those who are implementing the law are acting within a state that has normalized discrimination. So women de facto clearly remain second-class citizens in Arab countries. At this point, it is quite easy and also quite understandable to be pessimistic about the future of women in the Arab world. However, I think that there are also reasons to be more optimistic, or at least less pessimistic. Why? In my opinion, the main reason is that in the past few years, not only Muslim thinkers and reformers and also feminist organizations, but also prominent religious leaders and institutions have called for an egalitarian interpretation of religious texts, including the Quran, so as to grant an equal citizenship to all, irrespective of one's sex and religious affiliation. And this notion, the notion of citizenship, interpreted as equal citizenship, so the fact that all people must have the same rights and the same duties, is to a large extent a major novelty in Islamic constitutionalism. For example, between 2011 and 2017, Al-Azhar, which is obviously the most prestigious Sunni institution in the Islamic world, issued 4 extremely important declarations concerning the future of Egypt, 2011, basic freedoms, 2012, countering extremism and terrorism, 2014, and the last one, citizenship and coexistence, 2017. The content of all these documents, which were issued under the leadership of the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Ahmad al-Tayyib, with the participation of Muslim but also non-Muslim scholars, intellectuals, and thinkers, is to a large extent very innovative. In particular, according to Al-Azhar, one of the most important pillars, if not the most important pillar, upon which the Egyptian society and indirectly all Arab societies should be based, is a citizenship, again, interpreted as equal citizenship. I don't have much time left, so I would like now to draw your attention to the document on human fraternity for war, peace, and living together, which was jointly signed by the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Ahmad al-Tayyib, and Pope Francis during his apostolic journey to the United Arab Emirates in February 2019. Interestingly, the content of this document, in terms of both aspirations and lexicon, clearly recalls the documents by Al-Azhar that I've just mentioned, as well as some encyclicals by Pope Francis, including the latest one, Fratelli Tutti. In the document on human fraternity, Pope Francis and Al-Tayyib call in particular for a recognition of a full and equal citizenship to all. This is the expression that they use, including women and non-Muslims, which is the other category of people that has historically been the object of the harshest discriminations in Arab countries. And let me just briefly quote the part of this document concerning women's rights. It is an essential requirement to recognize the right of women to education and employment, and to recognize their freedom to exercise their own political rights. Moreover, efforts must be made to free women from historical and social conditioning that runs contrary to the principles of their faith and dignity. It is also necessary to protect women from sexual exploitation and from being treated as merchandise or objects of pleasure or financial gain. Accordingly, an end must be brought to all those inhuman and vulgar practices that denigrate the dignity of women. Efforts must be made to modify those laws that prevent women from fully enjoying their rights. So the key point that I would like to make is that since, as we all know, religion exercises a very profound influence on law and society in Arab countries, this new, more egalitarian approach suggested by Al-Azhar, but also by other religious leaders and institutions, might contribute to fighting against the prejudices and might also lead more easily to the adoption of legal reforms aimed at removing, or at least aimed at reducing, the discriminations against women and non-Muslims towards a more equal citizenship. And interestingly, some of the documents issued by these religious leaders and institutions explicitly declare the need to carry out these type of legal reforms. The document on human fraternity by Pope Francis and Ayal Tayyib that I've just mentioned explicitly states, and I repeat that efforts must be made to modify those laws that prevent women from fully enjoying their rights. I'm perfectly aware that the journey towards a full and equal citizenship for all in the Arab world is still incredibly long, incredibly complicated, but I do think that this new, more egalitarian approach is a particularly important step forward and give us some reasons to think about the future of women and also non-Muslims in the Arab world in a more optimistic, or at least in less pessimistic terms. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Francesco. Thank you for this brilliant acknowledgement of the constitutional dimension of women's citizenship. Thank you so much for bringing the very issue of citizenship to the table. This is a crucial issue, and it is also, it seems to me very interesting how much the battles that you talked about for the full integration of women mirror the battles that have been fought by feminist movements in the West. The concept of citizenship is an exclusionary concept. Thank you also for bringing into the issue of non-Muslims. The problem of diversity is an overall problem, so it was particularly important that you brought these two concepts together. I will now give the word to Liya Makhmutova.
Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, it is a big pleasure and honor to be here and with you and the participants in such an important session about gender equality. I appreciate the opportunity to take part as a speaker in G20 Interfaith Forum and in this beautiful city. So I will give you a very short brief about women Muslim rights in Islam. When we are dealing with the Islamic perspective of any topic, we should be a clearer distinction between the normal teaching of Islam and the diverse culture practices among Muslims, which may or may not be consistent with them. In defining what is Islamic, it is necessary to make a distinction between the primary sources of Islam and legal opinions of scholars in specific issues which may vary and be influenced by the times, circumstances, and cultures. This topic can be divided. My topic is about Muslim women rights in Islam can be divided in the spiritual, economic, social, and political aspects. I will bring only a few examples, few points. Yeah, so about spiritual aspect, according to the Quran, men and women have the same spiritual human nature. It is he who created you from a single person and man he's made of like nature in order that he might dwell here in love. Quran 7:188. Both genders are recipients of the divine breath since they are created with the same human and spiritual nature, nafsun wahida. But he fashioned him in a due proportion and breathed into him something of his spirit and gave you the facilities of hearing and sight and feeling. Little thanks to you give. Both genders are dignified and are trustees of Allah and Earth, Khalifa. We have honored the children of Adam, provided them with transport and on land and sea, given them for sustenance and think good and pure, and conferred on them special favor above a great part of our creation. According to the Quran, woman is not blamed for the fall of man. Pregnancy and childbirth are not seen as a punishment of eating from the forbidden tree. So by the sea, he brought about their fall. Then they tasted of the tree, their shame became manifest to them, and they began to sew together the leaves of the garden over their bodies. And their Lord called unto him, did I not forbid you that tree and tell you that Satan was an avowed enemy unto you? They said, oh Lord, we have wronged our own souls. If you forgive us not and bestow not upon us your mercy, we shall certainly be lost. Men and women have the same religious and moral duties and responsibilities. They both face the consequences of their deeds. For Muslim men and women, and for believing men and women, for devout men and women, for true men and women, for men and women who are patient and constant, for women and women who humble themselves, for men and women who gives in charity, for men and women who fast, for men and women who guard their chastity, and for women and men and women who engage much in Allah's praise for them, has Allah prepared forgiveness and great reward. Quran 33:35. And so I will skip some points to be short in my speech. And about economic aspects, the Islamic Sharia recognizes the full property rights for women before and after marriage. A married woman may keep her maiden name, and greater financial security is assured for women. They are entitled to receive marital gift to keep present and future properties and income for their own security. No married woman is required to spend a penny from her property and income on her household. She's entitled to full financial support during marriage and during the waiting period, the iddah, in case of divorce. She is also entitled to child support. Generally, a Muslim woman guaranteed support in all stages of her life as a daughter, wife, mother, or sister. It is, of course, a normative teaching of Islam, but when we are talking about reality, of course, women are very a part of financial budget, and she's always supporting her family. So based on this, I want to highlight one point, that wife has a right to refuse to have intimacy with her husband. She doesn't need to intimate him to go outside on the condition of she is responsible of the part of the family budget. So this is Islamic opinion. And I'm also dealing with Muslim women rights in our organization, Baltic Muslim Women Union. I work as an advisor for women. So we also encourage women to make a marriage contract before getting married, and to put conditions, which is also included. Those part was I'm already had mentioned before, and to have a right to work without permission of her husband, to have a social activity without a permission to have. So these points are important, and this marriage contract is a part of our religion, is a part of our Sharia. But in our region, in Baltic states, and maybe in the whole Europe as well, women didn't know about this, don't know about this, and they're rushing to make a nikah, and imams as well often don't encourage women to make a marriage contract. So this is our point, and it's a very important thing. Maybe I'll skipped all these things because it's so long, but I want to speak second part of my speech. I will skip all of this. My second part is about Muslim in the Baltic region. Yeah. In order to understand who a Muslim woman in the Baltic region, we have to back to history in Islam there. Compact settlement of Muslim in Grand Duchy of Lithuania come back to the 14th century. The Grand Duke Vytautas invited the Tatars to help him to defend the land from the Crusades. Tatars held a high position in the state. They were military, served the Grand Duke, and guarded the borders. They opposed the German order at the Battle of Grunwald and defeated them. This year, Lithuania, I'm originally from Estonia, but the Baltic states included Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. This year, Lithuania had officially declared the year of Lithuanian Tatars. Today, we are witnesses of the fact that Islam has been exiled on this territory for 7 centuries. The original Muslim in the Baltic region are the Tatars. The second wave of immigration was after Russian Revolution in the 1917, after 1917. And if we are talking about Muslim women in context with Tatar origin, we can say that culturally Muslim woman was always, Tatar woman, was always on the dignified and respectable position in the society. They hadn't been only a household keeper, but they are active in regular life aspects. We can bring one very interesting example. On 11 May 1917, the participant of the All-Russia Muslim Congress elected a woman, Mukhlisa Bubi, as a Qadi, Muslim judge, to the Center Spiritual Administration of the Muslim of Inner Russia and Siberia, granting legal authority to a woman, and Central Religious Institute was unexpected in the Muslim world. It was a very interesting fact. In addition, Tatars have their own famous females teacher tradition named as Abastai Institute. So the Tatars have an Abastai Institute. Abastai, they always played an important role in Tatar communities where they organized traditional female education and participated in the scholarly network of men. They were always wives of imams. and they played and still play a very important role in our society. Nowadays, we have in the Baltic Muslim Union, which is represented 3 Baltic states. And I'm dealing with Muslim women's rights by working as a family law advisor, by raising the awareness between Muslims. I can say there is no problem with infringement of the Muslim women's rights, but the sense is that there is that there in only one side submission of knowledge, interpretation, and lack of the Islamic knowledge of the women's rights, and confusion between normative teaching of Islam and the diverse cultural practices among Muslims. Thank you very much.
So thank you so much for this brilliant exposition, and thank you for bringing in the diversity of the experiences of women in Islam. This is so important, not to think that religions are monoliths, right? This was particularly enlightening, and thank you also for mentioning the experience of women teachers. And thank you also for sharing your experience as an advisor for women, even challenging the traditional leaders' authority in when you mentioned the marriage contract controversies. Thank you so much. So I will ask both, well, Francesco already left, so I will ask you to please sit with the public, and I will ask Professor Tabbara to join me here as Professor Wang will join us via Zoom. Thank you.
Thank you. Shall I go ahead? Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be on this panel, and especially with you after I had been here more than 2 years ago, before Corona, to give a lecture also to your students about Islamic feminism and feminist interpretation of the Quran. Yet this is not what I will be talking about now. I wanted to talk more about a practical experience that we are doing now in Lebanon. This experience is in partnership with the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and here with the Ambassador Michael Soor present with us, and with Dan Mission. And it is about personal status laws in Lebanon, personal status laws, or also called family laws. For those, to brief you about the situation in Lebanon, we do not have civil personal status laws, only religious personal status laws. Somehow there is in Article 9 in our Lebanese constitution that recognizes freedom of belief, but also recognizes the right of the different communities in Lebanon to have their own schools and their own courts. But somehow from this recognition, it became as if it was the sole propriety of the religions to have courts of personal status laws. Until now, we don't have a civic law. There is a large civil law for personal status laws. For some time now, for decades, feminist NGOs have been asking to have a civil personal code, but until now it has been met with refusal, whether from politicians, from religious leaders, or from also the people. So this is where we came in as Adyan Foundation, and Adyan, our foundation, means religions in the plural. We have 15 years of experience, not only in education on diversity and on inclusive citizenship, but also in working with religious institutions for the values of public life and human rights. So instead of, and trying also to bridge the gap between the different components of society that work in this regard. So instead of having a polarization between civil society and feminist organization on the one hand and religious institutions on the other hand, trying to bridge that gap together in order to do a change in these personal status laws, while also believing that on the side, other organizations are working for civil personal status codes. So I want to give you an example. We have currently 15 personal status codes and courts in Lebanon, religious, Muslim and Christian. And working on those, you realize that actually we have the same problems in both, in the Christian and Muslim courts. We have patriarchal perception, and we have discrimination of women's rights. Of course, the first discrimination is for all the people that are non-religious, be they men or women, who cannot have marriages and everything else in Lebanon because they have to be under one identity. So this discrimination put aside, I'm going to give you a few of the discriminations that we find in the personal status codes, both male and female. The most famous one is, of course, the question of custody of children. Women in those the different personal status codes cannot keep their children for a long time. And some of those codes, they lose their custody of their children after a divorce when the kids are 2 years old, at that young of an age. With others, they can keep until 14 or 15, but as soon as the woman remarries, she loses the right of the custody of her children, whereas the man, if he remarries, doesn't lose the children. So you can see that. The second also important discrimination that is found across Christian and Muslim also courts is the issue of guardianship. So guardianship is different than custody. Guardianship is the one who takes the decision concerning the children, including deciding which school they go to, including opening a bank account for the kids, and including travel for the kids. Recently, we've had reforms that have allowed to speak about parental and not fatherly guardianship. But as soon as the father passes away, in all our courts, guardianship goes to the uncle. So the woman, even if she has the custody of the children, she's raising the children, but she's not taking the decisions. It's the uncle who decides which school they go to, where they will live, everything concerning the children. So as if she has no value herself, and as if she's not a full citizen in a way. So this is an example. A third example I would like to give is in the case of mixed marriages, Christian and Muslim. In that case, the children always follow and this is not a religious law, this is in the civil law in Lebanon, always follow the religion of the father. But in the case of a death in the family, the woman is considered, because she's from a different religion, whether she's a Muslim married to a Christian or a Christian married to a Muslim, she's always considered as if she's the odd one out, as if she's from outside the family, because at the moment of death, whether hers or the husband, she does not inherit nor give inheritance, because she's from a different religion. So she raised those children. She was there, but at the moment of death, she's somewhere else. Of course, also at the moment of death, if she has kept her religion, she is also buried somewhere else. So you can see that all of those discrimination. Also, we have discrimination in access to justice and access to divorce or annulment of marriage. Access to divorce in Islamic courts is way more difficult from women for women than men, and when they are granted access to divorce, they have to lose everything, to give up everything, to give up alimony, to give up also seeing the children, or and the same we find also seeing the children in Christian courts. Also in Christian courts, she cannot ask for an annulment for violence. So violence is not recognized as a cause abuse and violence is not recognized as a cause for annulling the marriage. So these are some of the examples, but the examples are very much anchored in both the courts. So what we are doing, as I told you, we're trying to work with the religious leaders, and thus I chose to speak about this because here we're talking about religious denial and religious support. What we've done is sessions with religious leaders to talk about these issues, and definitely we see denial and support. The denial is that no, we're not patriarchal. Most of the time we found that the Sunni would say, oh, we're better than the Shia, and the Christians would say, oh, we're better than the Muslims. So we're always not patriarchal in comparison with the others who are worse than us. But what we did also is one-on-one interviews with all the religious leaders and the persons in charge of the courts, and the interviewers were always, the interview was trying to be positive, asking them, where can we do the reform? On what texts and on what grounds can we do the reform? In Egypt, they did this. Can we do this here? In Tunisia, they did this. So we're giving some examples of other countries, of possibilities for reform to ask, or comparing sometimes the different Christian communities, telling them, well, the Protestants did this, can you do this here? So this is the this is the way to try to open their eyes to what's happening, because sometimes they actually don't know what is happening otherwise in other parts of the world, what is happening in theological reinterpretation of some verses, for example, in Islamic, some verses of the Quran by the feminist reinterpretations. For those who don't know, there is a big organization called Musawa that is working on Muslim personal status laws all over the world for that. So we've been working with them on that to make them aware, and a report will come out of all the issues from inheritance, age of marriage, custody, guardianship, alimony, all of those issues. What is the actual situation and where are the possibilities of reform according to anonymous religious leaders? So, and I'm saying with what we've seen the whole range from the complete denial to some denial to supports, but the support most of the time is still hushed. So you would have you would have a religious leader telling us, I am with the change, 100% with the change, but I cannot say my name because some of them have already spoken for change, and because they've spoken, they were told by the religious authority, next time you don't speak. So we're taking them anonymously and pushing for that. And what we are doing in parallel, we are doing a campaign now, actually. There is a campaign on the TVs in Lebanon showing the discrimination through very short videos that are like a soap opera. So showing how it's the uncle who chooses for the children after the death, showing those questions through a soap opera and with the slogan that this bad soap opera needs to end. So this way, saying that and showing also that we can all together work to change this. So working on the I mean, awareness of people, because some people don't know the rule, the laws on the discrimination. They don't know about CEDAW. So we've done also a survey that is being published, a report that will be published now, the media campaign, sectorial meetings with all of those involved. So it's the religious leaders, the lawyers who are working on that issue, the feminist NGOs, secular judges, to work together, parliamentarians working on human rights and women's rights, all of those together to push forward. And we will have an international theological conference for the religious leaders to hear what is happening worldwide in reinterpretation and I mean, re-explaining and showing them really that actually what is happening now in the religious courts means that you are considering that women have less value than men and definitely less capacities. So,
So thank you so much, Nayla, for this incredibly rich presentation. You raised so many points that it's difficult to make any comments. I just want to emphasize how important it is, your emphasis on social mobilization and social, including through the media, how avoiding polarization is necessarily something which has to go through this very patient work that you're doing with different actors. Thank you also for mentioning how very often the problem is the projection of patriarchy onto somebody else, another other, so the Shia, the Sunni, etc., which is an easier way rather than to confront what are our own shortcomings. Thank you for emphasizing the importance of knowledge and dialogue. I thought it was so interesting when you said that it really makes a difference to bring into the conversation the experience of other states, of other countries. So this really should make us even more aware of how important it is that we keep talking to one another and exchanging and engaging in this dialogue. Thank you so much. And now you can stay until Professor Wang, as you prefer, as you're more comfortable. So now I invite Professor Wang to address our panel.
Hello, can you hear me? Can
Yes.
everybody hear? Okay. Hello, everyone. It's my honor to be here to participate in this panel. Actually, my presentation is an extension of previous speeches. It will show how some religions have different practices in different places. My discussion will be based on the case of Chinese Islam. Actually, 15 years ago, one day I visited the famous Indian Muslim reformist Ali engineer in Mumbai. At his office, I met a Muslim mom and her daughter who had returned to India from United States. During our conversation, the mother doubted why she can attend the Friday worship and mosque in the United States, but in her hometown of India, she was excluded from Friday gathering at the mosque. So this question also made me very curious. So I'm thinking, do Muslim women have the right to participate in the Friday prayer in the mosques? Is attending the Friday prayers an equal religious right for women and women? Does the support and the denial of this right come from the scripture of Islam? In other words, what is Islam's attitude towards gender equality? Is it as explained by the Taliban? Or is it as interpreted by some Islamic feminists? For example, they usually say it's women and men are equal but different. If we take the contemporary concept of gender equality as the standard, we can of course find some paragraphs that are less gender equality and unfavorable to women in the Quran and Hadith. From a certain point of view, these contents may be regarded as religious denial of gender equality. However, in field work in different regions, we will find that women living in Islamic culture contexts may have various experiences, just as the previous speakers mentioned. What we need to distinguish is what degree that their rights and status depend on religious doctrine, and in what degree depend on the historic and social contexts. Today, I would like to illustrate this issue by the example of Chinese Muslim women. I have some pictures. I want to share my computer screen. I'm not sure it can work. I will try. Oh, okay. It said I'm not allowed to share my screen. I'm not sure. So it's okay. I have visited many mosques in different parts of the world. No problem. I can share those pictures of Chinese Islam after my presentation. No problem. I can.
It's not possible to share your screen. I'm sorry about that. We just checked with our technical team.
Oh, okay, no problem. If it's possible, I will do it after my presentation, after my speech. Okay, I have visited many mosques in different parts of the world, and I found there are usually special areas for female Muslims to participate Friday worship in most of the mosque, such a corner of worship hall separated with curtains, or an exclusive floor in the mosque. Women can follow the guidance of male imams to practice their religion. There are few mosques, but there are few mosques exclusive for women, not to mention female imam or clergies. But in China, since the 19th century, female Muslims have had their own separate mosques. In these mosques, female Muslims can follow female imams to participate in Friday prayers, taking religious classes, and get help and comfort from female imams or with each other. At the beginning of the 20th century, there are still more than 100 such mosques in China. This is undoubtedly important for Muslim women to maintain their religious identity and pursue equal rights of belief. In areas where there are no women's mosques, Chinese mosques usually set a certain place for women's religious activity. Muslim women can do individual and group prayers here, and can also participate in various study classes. Such places usually are called women's school. This difference between women's school and the mosque is that there is no female imam during worship, but women can follow the male imams of the great mosque through video or audio. However, women's schools are equipped with female teachers to teach religious knowledge and answer questions. In 21st century, the women's mosque actually has encountered some doubts and challenges. Some Muslims believe that it's not customary in the Islamic world to set up a separate mosques for women. Or others believe that women serving as imams are not in accordance with Islamic law. It's a bid'ah. We all know it's innovation. They call it's an innovation. That at the same time, female imams in some areas are aging, where young people interested in doing this kind of work is declining. This brings great uncertainty to the development of women's mosques. However, in the field work, I still meet some young Muslim women who are willing to take up this job. They are well educated and devout. For them, seeking knowledge is the common right of male and female Muslims, and seeking guidance and salvation is also the common right of all Muslims. For them, it's clearly recognized in Islamic scriptures. We all know religious scripture is fixed. It cannot be changed. Social space is a complex and dynamic concept which varies depending on influence of life experience, autonomy, and will. Thanks to the efforts of Chinese Muslim women, women's mosque not only provides religious education for women, but also transmits the concept of social justice and gender equality to women. This is the support of gender equality rather than denial. Thank you. That's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Wang, for this very fascinating presentation concerning the activism of Islamic women in China. So I'm sorry about the technical issues that we experienced. And now I will call our last two panelists to please, well, one is already here, so you can, well, thank you so much, Nayla. And if I understand correctly, you go first, okay? Yes, so you go to the end, you prefer? You go now? You prefer? So you, okay, so I will now give Jean the floor.
Thank you, Susanna. How's everybody doing? It's been a long, very, very interesting morning, and I'm so pleased to be able to be part of this panel on faith and gender equality. In my work over the years of forging collaborations between faith and secular groups, I've spent a lot of time trying to understand and navigate the complex range in faith context, the complex range of beliefs and attitudes relating to gender justice. My perspective then is not as a gender equality expert per se, but rather as a student of what it takes to work across differences in gender and sexual and reproductive rights to forge common understanding, common ground for action, and the common good. You might see me perhaps as an activist for doing what's more of what's working. I've been privileged to serve as a member of the Interfaith group, working group and yet religions affirm the intrinsic humanity and dignity of all persons and have the influence and trust to change hearts and minds and lead transformation on gender-related attitudes and norms. We know that. Michael O'Flaherty, a fellow countryman of mine who I met yesterday, who directs the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights, reminded us yesterday how the pillars of decency in society are grounded in faith-inspired beliefs and values, pointing out that the 5 foundational EU values are dignity, freedom, equality, solidarity, and justice, all values grounded and embedded in the traditions of the great religions. We need to practice what we preach. We can start by actively recognizing, documenting, and supporting the transformational changes already taking place to advance gender equality in faith contexts. Recommendation number 4 from the working group reads, document, elevate, and support people, institutions, and initiatives leading change at the intersection of faith, gender equality, and women's leadership. I'd like to highlight 3 ways to do that, 3 ways to strengthen the narrative of faith actors already at the center of positive change in regard to gender equality. The first, and we've heard some wonderful contributions this morning, relates to elevating theologies that affirm gender equality. Pastor Lidia spoke to us about this. Great progress has been made in Jewish, Christian and Muslim faiths in recontextualizing theologies, affirming women and men as both being created equal, that gender justice is God's will. In the Christian world, for example, the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians, a pan-African ecumenical organization supporting the scholarly work of African women theologians, is a platform for feminists and women theologians to shape narratives relating to gender justice. There are many new theological discourses emerging in Islamic circles, recontextualizing Islamic teachings for the modern era. For example, as was mentioned by Francesco, the scholarly work being led by Al-Azhar University. And I would also note the Islamic Declaration on Gender Justice put forth by Islamic Relief. A second way to highlight faith actors at the center of change for gender equality is to recognize women who are already in leadership as ordained leaders of religious communities and faith-based organizations and as lay leaders, and elect more of them and support them. We recognize, for example, Presiding Bishop Purity Malinga, who is the first woman in a 200-year history of the Methodist Church in South Africa to be elected. 99 men came before her. She's a great example of breaking the chain of male dominance in church leadership. We recognize young leaders, and we've heard some wonderful young leaders on the panel this morning. Thank you so much, Liya and others. Many of us yesterday heard Zahra Mohammed, who is the new Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain. And we're just enchanted by the energy, the leadership, and the vision that she and her young perspective bring, the energy. We recognize Religions for Peace, a 50-year-old organization, for electing as its General Secretary a powerful woman leader in the person of Asa Karam. I could go on, but you get my point. Women are leading in faith contexts, and we need to raise the profile and the visibility. The documentation is poor, and the visibility is poor. As part of a 17 rooms project that is supported by the Rockefeller Foundation and the Brookings Institution that Bani, Dugal, and others have joined me on, we are working to increase the visibility of women leaders in faith contexts and to strengthen connections among them and across generations for mutual support. The third area that I would like to flag by way of a focus on what's working and what's going forward is to collaborate with progressive religious institutions. So recommendation number 2 of the working group is to engage with existing dialogical platforms where policymakers and faith actors are already exploring ways to optimize faith engagement in gender equality and to encourage the creation of similar dialogical platforms where they don't exist in countries and so forth. So very quickly, because our time is so short here, to just flag some of the progressive institutions by way of example. I'm really blown away by the work of ACT Alliance, prioritizing activities that advance equality and inclusivity, especially for women and girls. The Adyan Foundation that we just heard from this morning is really an example of a progressive institution worthy of note. The global humanitarian Islamic movement, as represented by the world's largest Muslim organization, the Indonesian Nahdlatul Ulama, recognizes all citizens, irrespective of ethnicity or religion, as having equal rights and holds out great hope for progress. Religions for Peace, we've mentioned. The World Council of Churches, I think, is another organization, an ancient organization bringing religions representing 500 million Christians around the world, has made just gender relations and just communities of women and men a priority in all its work. I would like to also draw attention to the necessity of improving the evidence base and perhaps just flag the Joint Learning Initiative on Faith and Local Communities partnership with the Sexual and Violence Research Institute in South Africa for its learning hub on faith and gender-based violence, documenting the progressive work that faith communities are leading. The time has come, and indeed, it is long past to, and I use a cliche here, but it's apt, to be the change we want to see when it comes to gender equality in religious contexts. The G20 Interfaith platform has the opportunity to put its well-deserved and hard-earned credibility to work even more extensively now by modeling gender equity in its own programming. We can go way beyond the frequent practice of assembling the group and then adding a sprinkle of gender for inclusivity. We need to intentionally and a priori place women at the center, assuring that the noble male representatives of religious and faith-inspired organizations are complemented with women leaders in equal numbers. We very much appreciate, and I know I speak for everybody here, the efforts of the organizing committee for the G20 21 event here in Bologna. Next year, the G20 Interfaith Forum will be held in Indonesia, a country that sets exemplary standards for gender equity and women's citizenship in its constitution and in its legal framework. This will present a tremendous opportunity to model gender equity with co-leadership from women of faith, young and old, visible across all its agenda, and mainstreaming in the program, especially in the plenary and leadership sessions. Yesterday, I think we were all inspired by All Holiness Patriarch Bartolomeo, who called us to urgently adopt transformational agendas for a sustainable and resilient future. Gender equality sits right at the heart of that. Let us practice what we preach and model gender equality in all we do. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jean. Thank you so much for this energetic and optimistic presentation. We really need a lot of that. Thank you for pointing to all the efforts that have been made. Thank you for pointing to the road ahead. I particularly value your point that progressive religious faith as NGOs, etc., must be part of the conversation. Sometimes I think there is this widespread impression that conservatives own morality, that conservative voices are authentic voices. Well, that's not true at all. As you correctly showed, progressive segments and the progressive dimensions within religious traditions is not a lesser voice by any means. So thank you very much for pointing that. Thank you also for pointing to the fact that we have to adhere to our standards. The problem is that, as we heard from Francesco, very often standards and values such as dignity, equality are semantically unstable. So equality turns into complementarity, etc. That's exactly why we need this kind of dialogue with progressive institutions, with different voices from religious tradition. Thank you very much. So last but not least, I now give the floor to Wolfgang.
Thank you very much. I would like to actually take this brilliant and meaningful energy, much appreciated, and bring it with you, take you somewhere completely different. I bring you to Afghanistan. I have worked on the country since 1982. I have visited it many times, even under combat, and can only say that's the example of what the previous speaker just brought in non-verbal energy to you. The resilience, the determination, the meaning, and the work of women. And the subject of my lecture, which will be short-tailed because I believe in Q&A, is very simple: the sinus curve or the wave of gender rights in Afghan history. And very much in difference to what media and all those who have never been in the country report. Much of that society, much of the resilience, the survival, the beauty, and the depths of that country has been carried by women. So very much in difference to what our sometimes so off mainstream media reports, Afghanistan has seen an amazing flowering of civil society. Former Afghan students of myself are running or have been or had been running. Most successful businesses, from saffron to whatever applied, to textile. And if you hopefully occasionally visit BBC World Service, you might just have seen a report yesterday about new kinds of protests through cloths, through all kinds of imaginary acts by women. But there has been a word missing in most of this wonderful conference. And I actually applaud the organizers, and I think it's an amazing achievement. And I am doing now a hand movement with all my Princeton students have seen me doing since years. Technology, social media. One of the reasons why we have a complete break in the empowerment of women is from 2001 on, with the entry of Western forces into Afghanistan, the cell phone got introduced. And the cell phone is perhaps the most powerful instrument of equalization, of communication, and of conveying messages and images instantaneously. So that, as much as in the Middle East, as much in the Green Revolution in Iran, has not only changed, but empowered women, independent who they are, where they are, how wealthy they are, how influential their families are, as long as they are relatively close to a cell phone tower. So, just for brevity, there have been many phases in Afghan history, and the country itself went through several wars, as we know, at least 3 English ones, which the last one, the third Anglo-Afghan war, was only finished 1919. And then something happened without which, understanding it, you cannot grasp the situation of women in Afghanistan or the Afghan society. Afghanistan has a long border with Iran. Afghanistan had an important border with the Soviet Union. And Afghanistan, lo and behold, has a long border with Pakistan. And through these 3, all ended borders on China. And through 3+1 angles, you feel already the influence. So when the last Anglo-Afghan war was terminated in 1919, and when we had the changing war of the world roughly 100 years ago, 1919, the Great War. Yes, we call it also the First World War, but it was the war which changed empires and diminished empires. As an Austrian, I know what I'm talking about. This permitted then a radical modernization influenced also by Kemal Atatürk, and women became ready and permitted to join education. And eventually there was a development of a kingdom which really only changed in 1974 and was then abolished, and there was the creation of a socialist republic. But during that period, Afghan women and the society flowered. I would urge you to try to see on the web pictures of Kabul of the 1960s. Full empowerment, however, Afghanistan very dispersed and no central authority. When I visited Afghanistan first time in 2002, it had 38 kilometers of roads throughout a country the size of France, and with around, at that time, 25 million inhabitants. The real issue for reticence of women empowerment did not happen, as it is generally said, through the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. Yes, there were strifes. Yes, there were problems, of course. But the catastrophe for Afghan women was through the Mujahideen warfare once under Gorbachev, the Soviet Union withdrew. At that point, women suffered tremendously. And at that point also, I personally visited areas, regions where no medical doctor, Western medical educated or Russian educated doctor was since 1975. Unimaginable, but it was the women who run the society. And in this Mujahideen period, from roughly 95 to 2001, it emerged the Taliban, which was fed by Saudi support, by Pakistani support, and also originally by Western support, and was actually welcomed quasi, especially on the country, on the rural areas, to bring some kind of stability in it. And yes, women were banned from the street, but some of them, I really personally, felt a bit more secure anyway within their realm and protection. And it was them who, on their own, here comes the R word of resilience, contributed to education and empowerment of the family. The role of the women in this part, in the communities, was, bless you, was extremely important, and they were protected. But nevertheless, their outside appearance was extremely curtailed. And the role of young women and girls, loving father of 2 daughters, was, for our Western standards, just unimaginable. You would actually marry them off for whatever reasons when they are just being able to be pregnancy around 11, 12 years old. So for us, it all changed 2001. It all changed 2001 after 9/11, 20 years ago, with 2 important things. The West came in with all its technologies, but there's another term I want you to take away from here. The PRT, the provincial reconstruction teams. And I say this in Italy, which had one of the most beaming PRTs. There were sub places in Afghanistan where a Western country took it on with all its effort and power to bring in assistance, to bring in education, to bring in empowerment, and yes, of course, to bring in technology. So you had, I have here, I'm at Princeton, I've been running Afghanistan since ever, and in my own institute, and we summarize international graphs, charts, and maps in all languages. And for preparation of this year, I bring a World Bank chart, which speaks about gender parity and literacy among youth in Afghanistan. And just to give you an idea, 1110 would be equal. In 1960, according to the World Bank report, it was 0.2 for gender, here on the bottom. In 2020, it was 0.8. And oh surprise, the boom came up straight in 2001. How old is the cell phone? Oh, 18 years, 15 years. It was precisely that. I think one of the most underreported and underconcerned evaluation of the empowerment for women is the role of social media and technology. And yes, unfortunately, it will also go towards control. And this is one of the message I give to the G20. We have to ascertain the freedom for women to be able to use their own social media and technology. And you will see that will be the most important act now of the Taliban, to confiscate cell phones, to blow up towers, to control the communication between the women. My final point, as it has proven since thousands of years, none of the cultures we so enjoy would be possible without the other 50%, the women. It's on us, on the men, to protect them, to encourage them, and to empower them. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Wolfgang, for having brought in the, the current tragedy of Afghanistan and for having recalled the trajectory that actually led to this particularly catastrophic situation nowadays. This was very welcome. And I think we really can all, it's a wonderful way somehow to conclude that there is so much to be done. Very unfortunately, all these interventions were so fascinating that we kind of got to the end without even realizing we don't really have any time, but I think we can continue our conversation informally once we close the panel. So thank you so much for all of you for being here with us. Thank you to all of the panelists. Thank you to the public that is numerous here. And it's wonderful to see how much interest the topic of gender equality in the context of religious diversity raises. So thank you, everyone. And let's continue the conversation.